I didn't think losing a stupid bet would change the way I looked at my best friend forever. It started as one of those late-night arguments that spiral way out of control. You know the kind, too much energy, not enough sleep, and both of us way too stubborn to back down. Dylan and I had been like that for years. Competitive about everything. Games, workouts, even who could survive longer on terrible cafeteria food back in college. That night, it was basketball. We were at this empty outdoor court, the kind with flickering lights and cracked pavement, sometime past midnight. The air was cool, the city quiet in that eerie way where it feels like everyone else has disappeared. First to 11, Dylan said, spinning the ball on his finger like he always did when he was feeling confident. Loser does whatever the winner says. I should have walked away right then. What kind of whatever? I asked, narrowing my eyes. He smirked. That same smirk he always had when he knew he was about to win. Don't worry, he said. Nothing illegal. That should have reassured me. It didn't. Still, I nodded. Fine. But no backing out. Never do, he replied. And that was the problem. Dylan didn't back out. Ever. We started playing, and right away I knew I was in trouble. He was on fire, every shot clean, every move sharp. Meanwhile, I was missing easy layups like I'd never held a ball before. It was like the universe had decided to humiliate me personally. By the time the score hit 10-6, I was already frustrated. Getting tired? Dylan teased, bouncing the ball lazily. Shut up, I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. But he wasn't wrong. I was off my game, and he knew it. Final play. He drove past me, quick and effortless, and scored like it was nothing. 11-6. Game over. I bent over, hands on my knees, catching my breath while he just stood there, watching me. Not even winded. I win, he said simply. Yeah, I noticed, I replied. There was a pause. And then he said it. All right, you remember the deal. I straightened up slowly, already regretting every life choice that led me here. Yeah, so what do you want? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his hoodie from the bench, took a sip from his water bottle, like he was dragging it out on purpose. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and something about that made my chest tighten. I want you to come over tonight, he said. I blinked. That's it. No, he added, voice calm. You're staying over. I frowned. Dude, I've stayed over before. That's not even a punishment. He stepped closer, just enough that I could see the shift in his expression. Less joking now. More intentional. Yeah, he said quietly. But this time, you don't get your own bed. I let out a short laugh. What? Your couch broken or something? No, he said. Another pause. You're sleeping with me. That's when the air changed. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. Dylan had always been unpredictable, sure. But this felt different. Not like a joke. Not like one of our usual dumb dares. You're kidding, I said. I don't joke about bets, he replied. Of course he didn't. That's weird, I said, scratching the back of my neck. Why? He shrugged, casual on the surface. Because I said so. That's the deal. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Because technically he was right. A bet was a bet, and I had agreed. Still, something about the way he was looking at me made it hard to just brush it off. Dylan, I said slowly. It's not like I care, it's just… Just what? He interrupted. I hesitated. Just feels like there's more to it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled again, but this time, it wasn't the same easy, joking smile from earlier. Maybe there is, he said. And for some reason, that didn't make me want to back out. It made my heart beat faster. The drive to his place was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, we'd have music blasting, arguing about playlists, making fun of each other. But that night, it was just the low hum of the engine and the occasional glance I caught him stealing in the passenger seat. Or maybe I was imagining it. You're overthinking it, he said suddenly, like he'd read my mind. I'm not, I replied quickly. You are, he said, leaning his head back. It's just sleeping. Yeah, I muttered. Just sleeping. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't what this felt like. Not even close. When we got to his apartment, everything felt normal. Shoes kicked off by the door. Lights low. That familiar smell of his place clean, but with that faint hint of his cologne that always lingered. It should have relaxed me. Instead, it made me more aware of everything. You can take the shower first if you want, he said, tossing me a towel. I caught it, nodding. Yeah, thanks. The bathroom light flicked on, and I closed the door behind me, staring at my reflection for a second. What are you doing? I muttered under my breath. It was just a bet. Just Dylan. My best friend. Nothing more. Right? I turned on the water, trying to wash off the weird tension clinging to me. But it didn't go away. If anything, it got worse the longer I stood there, replaying his words in my head. You're sleeping with me. The way he said it. The way he looked at me. By the time I stepped out, towel around my waist, my heart was already beating faster than it should have been. And then I walked into his room. He was already there, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me, not saying anything, just watching. And that's when I realized, maybe this wasn't just a bet for him. And maybe it wasn't just a bet for me either. I should have made a joke. That's what we always did whenever things got even slightly uncomfortable. Deflect, laugh it off, move on. But standing there in his room, towel barely secured around my waist, with Dylan just staring at me like that, I couldn't find anything to say. Stop looking at me like that, I muttered, trying to sound normal. Like what? He asked, not even blinking. Like I don't know. I ran a hand through my damp hair. Planning something. That got a quiet huff of a laugh out of him. Relax, he said. You already lost. I don't need to plan anything. Right. That didn't help. I moved past him, trying to act casual as I grabbed one of his spare t-shirts from the chair. I'd worn it before, nothing new. But this time, everything felt different. The air felt heavier, like every small movement actually mattered. I pulled the shirt on, hyper-aware of him still watching. You always this tense? Dylan asked. Only when I'm being forced into weird sleepovers. I shot back. You've literally slept here dozens of times. Yeah, not like this. That made him go quiet. Not defensive, not annoyed, just quiet. And for some reason, that silence hit harder than anything he'd said so far. I turned to face him, leaning back slightly against the dresser. You gonna tell me what this is really about? His eyes flicked up to mine, steady. I told you, he said. It's the bet. Bullshit. The word slipped out before I could stop it. His eyebrow lifted slightly. You really think I'm that stupid? I added. Another pause. Then he stood up, slowly, and suddenly the distance between us didn't feel like enough. You always do this, Dylan said, voice lower now. You act like everything has to have some deeper meaning. Because sometimes it does. Or maybe, he stepped closer, you just don't like not being in control. That hit a little too close. I pushed off the dresser, straightening. This isn't about control. Then what is it about? I hesitated, because I didn't actually have a good answer. And he knew it. Dylan watched me for a second longer, then shook his head slightly, like he'd expected that. Look, he said, tone shifting just a bit softer. You can back out if you want. That surprised me. What? The bet, he shrugged. Forget it. Sleep on the couch. I don't care. But the way he said it didn't match the words. It wasn't indifference. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite name. And weirdly, that made my chest tighten more than if he'd just forced the issue. You just said you never back out. I pointed out. I don't, he said. You would be. There it was. The challenge. I let out a breath through my nose, shaking my head. You're such an ass. Yeah, he said, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. But you still haven't said no. I held his gaze. And yeah, that was the problem. Because I hadn't. Fine, I said finally. I'm not backing out. Something shifted in his expression again. Subtle, but definitely there. Good, he said. Getting into that bed felt way more complicated than it should have been. It was the same bed, same room, same everything. But none of it felt the same. I climbed in first, pulling the blanket up, keeping a careful distance from the other side. My heart was already beating too fast, like I'd just run another game instead of standing around arguing. Dylan turned off the light. The room dropped into darkness, broken only by the faint glow from outside. Then I felt the mattress dip as he got in. Closer than I expected. Dude, I muttered immediately. You don't have to be that close. There's plenty of space, he replied. Then use it. He didn't move. Of course he didn't. I stared up at the ceiling, trying to ignore how aware I was of everything, his breathing, the warmth of his body, the way the mattress shifted slightly whenever he adjusted. This is stupid, I told myself. Just sleep. But my body clearly didn't get the memo. Trent, he said quietly. Yeah. You're still overthinking. I exhaled slowly. I hate that you're right. I know. A small pause. Then, you always this aware when we're this close? My stomach tightened. What kind of question is that? I asked. A normal one. No, it's not. He shifted slightly, and I could feel it, his arm brushing mine for just a second. It shouldn't have been a big deal. It was. Answer it, he said. I swallowed. No, I admitted. Why not? I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. You really want to have this conversation right now? Yeah, he said simply. Of course he did. I turned my head slightly, even though I could barely see him in the dark. Because it's you, I said. The words came out before I could filter them. And the second they did, I felt my chest tighten. There was a beat of silence. Then, what's that supposed to mean? His voice wasn't teasing anymore. It was serious. And suddenly, there was no easy way out of this. I hesitated, then shook my head slightly against the pillow. Nothing. Forget it. No, he said, closer now. You don't get to do that. I exhaled, frustrated. It's not a big deal, okay? Then say it. Another pause. My heart was pounding so loud I was convinced he could hear it. It just means, I started, then stopped. Means what? I turned onto my side, facing away from him now. Means I notice it more with you, I said finally. The silence that followed felt heavy, not awkward, not uncomfortable, just loaded. And then I felt it. His hand, lightly resting against my arm. Not gripping, not forcing, just there. You notice me more? He asked quietly. Every instinct told me to pull away. I didn't. Yeah, I admitted. His fingers shifted slightly. Barely, but enough to send a sharp, unexpected jolt through me. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just tension anymore. This was something else. Something neither of us was pretending not to feel anymore. I don't know why I didn't move. That's the part that stuck with me later, the fact that I could have just shifted away, laughed it off, killed whatever this was before it even had a chance to become real. But I didn't. Dylan's hand was still on my arm. Light. Careful. Like he was giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't take it. Trent, he said quietly, my name sounding different coming from him now. Slower. More deliberate. Yeah. My voice came out lower than I expected. You gonna tell me to stop? There it was. A clear line. I stared into the darkness, my brain scrambling to catch up with what was happening. This wasn't just teasing anymore. This wasn't just a bet. This was a choice. And somehow, it felt like I'd already made it. No, I said. I felt him shift behind me. Closer. Not all at once, just enough that I could feel the heat of him more clearly now, the steady rise and fall of his breathing lining up almost perfectly with mine. His hand didn't leave my arm. If anything, it settled a little more. You're sure? He asked. I swallowed. Yeah. Another pause. Then his fingers moved. Slow. Deliberate. Sliding slightly along my arm. Not in a way that was aggressive or rushed, just exploring, like he was figuring out what I'd let him get away with. My body reacted instantly. Tension, heat, something sharp and electric running straight through me. I took a quiet breath, hoping he didn't notice. He did. You okay? He murmured. Yeah, I said quickly. Too quickly. A soft huff of amusement left him, close enough that I could feel it against the back of my neck. You're a terrible liar. Shut up. I muttered, but there was no real bite behind it. Because he wasn't wrong. I wasn't okay. I was very much not okay. And somehow, I didn't want to be. His hand slid a little higher, stopping just short of my shoulder. Not crossing any obvious line, but getting dangerously close. Tell me if I go too far, he said. That should have grounded me. It didn't. It just made everything feel more real. You won't, I replied quietly. Another small pause. Then, you trust me that much? I hesitated, because that wasn't a simple question. But the answer came anyway. Yeah, I said. And I meant it. That's what made this so dangerous. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying. Everything we'd probably been ignoring for way longer than either of us wanted to admit. Dylan's hand stayed where it was, but his thumb started moving slightly small, absent circles against my skin. It shouldn't have been a big deal. It really shouldn't have. But my body reacted like it was. Every nerve suddenly aware. Every tiny movement amplified. You're tense again, he said softly. No, I'm not. You are. I'm not. His hand stilled for a second. Then relax. Easier said than done. But I tried. I really did. I let out a slow breath, forcing my shoulders to loosen just a little. And that's when he moved again. Closer. This time, there was no pretending it was accidental. His chest pressed lightly against my back. Not fully, not trapping me, just enough to close the distance that had been hanging between us all night. My heart slammed hard against my ribs. Dylan, I said under my breath. What are we doing? It wasn't a challenge this time. It was a genuine question. And for once, he didn't have a quick answer. I don't know, he admitted. That caught me off guard. You don't know? No, he said, voice quieter now. I just know I didn't want you on the couch. Something about that hit deeper than it should have. I shifted slightly, turning just enough that I wasn't completely facing away from him anymore. Even in the low light, I could make out his face now, closer than it had any right to be. Why? I asked. His eyes held mine. And for once, there was no smirk, no teasing, just honesty. Because I've been thinking about this for a while, he said. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means, he paused, like he was choosing his words carefully for the first time all night. This wasn't just about the bet. I should have expected that. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. How long? I asked. He let out a quiet breath. Long enough that I knew you wouldn't agree unless I forced it. I stared at him. You forced it. I gave you a reason not to say no. That was annoyingly accurate. I could have backed out. I didn't. Because part of me didn't want to. You're unbelievable, I muttered. Yeah, he said softly. But you're still here. I didn't have a comeback for that. Because again, he wasn't wrong. We were quiet again after that. But everything had changed. There was no pretending anymore. No hiding behind jokes or stupid bets. Just the two of us. Too close. Too aware. And finally being honest about something we probably should have talked about a long time ago. My gaze dropped briefly to his lips, then back to his eyes. A mistake. Because he noticed. Of course he did. Trent, he said, barely above a whisper. Yeah. His hand moved again, this time not just resting, but sliding up to my shoulder, fingers curling slightly like he was grounding himself. If I do something, he started, then stopped. I raised an eyebrow slightly. That vague, huh? A faint smile flickered across his face, then faded. Are you going to stop me? There it was again. That line. Only this time, it felt closer. Realer. I held his gaze. And this time, I didn't hesitate. No, I said. And the second the word left my mouth, I knew there was no going back. The moment stretched. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way. Nothing about this felt cinematic or polished. It was messy, quiet, real. Just two people lying way too close, breathing the same air, both fully aware that something had shifted and neither of us pretending otherwise anymore. Dylan didn't move right away. He just looked at me, like he was making sure, like he was giving me one last chance to change my mind. I didn't. My heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt, but I didn't look away. If anything, I leaned into it, into whatever this was becoming. Okay, he said quietly, and then he closed the distance. It wasn't rushed. That's the thing I remember most. For someone who usually did everything fast, played fast, talked fast, made decisions without thinking, this was different. Slower. Careful. Like he actually cared about getting it right. His forehead brushed mine first. A pause. Breath mixing. And then, he kissed me. Soft. Almost hesitant. Like he expected me to pull back. I didn't. If anything, I leaned in just enough to meet him halfway, and that tiny movement seemed to be all the confirmation he needed. Because the next second, the hesitation faded. Not completely, but enough. His hand tightened slightly on my shoulder, grounding me, while the kiss deepened just a little. Still not aggressive. Still controlled. But no longer unsure. And yeah, that was it. That was the moment everything stopped feeling like a question. I exhaled against him, my hand instinctively finding his arm, gripping lightly like I needed something to hold on to. Dylan, I murmured, pulling back just enough to look at him. Yeah, he replied, still close. Too close. This is not just the bed anymore. A faint smile touched his lips. It never was, he said. I let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh. You're actually insane. Probably, he admitted. There was a beat. Then I shook my head slightly, studying his face. You really planned this? Not like this, he said. I just hoped you wouldn't say no. I held his gaze for a second longer. Then, good thing I didn't. Something in his expression softened in a way I hadn't seen before. Not confident. Not teasing. Just real. And for once, that hit harder than anything else. We didn't rush after that. That surprised me. I thought it would get awkward. Or intense. Or complicated in a way that would make one of us back off. But it didn't. We stayed close, talking in low voices, like if we spoke too loudly it would break whatever this was. How long? I asked at some point, tracing absent patterns against his arm. He knew what I meant. A while, he said. Didn't think you'd ever go for it. I huffed softly. Yeah, well, you didn't exactly make it obvious. I thought I did. You didn't. He smirked faintly. Guess I should have tried harder. I rolled my eyes. Or, actually said something. Where's the fun in that? I shook my head, but I couldn't stop the small smile tugging at my mouth. Same Dylan. Just not entirely the same. At some point, the conversation faded. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because we didn't need to fill the silence anymore. I ended up on my back, staring at the ceiling again, but this time, it felt different. Lighter. Like something that had been building for a long time had finally settled. Dylan shifted beside me, then closer again, his arm resting loosely across my side. Not testing, not asking, just there. And this time, I didn't tense. You still overthinking? He murmured. I let out a quiet breath. No. Good. A pause. Then, you regret it? I turned my head slightly to look at him. Even in the dim light, I could see at the hint of uncertainty he was trying, and failing, to hide. That caught me off guard. You? I asked. He shrugged faintly. I asked first. I watched him for a second, then shook my head. No, I said. And I meant it. Not even a little. Good. He said again, softer this time. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes. Maybe longer. Time felt weird. Slower. Like it didn't matter as much. Eventually, I shifted slightly, settling more comfortably into the pillow. You realize, I said, voice lazy now. This is gonna make things weird. Dylan huffed a quiet laugh. Everything we do is weird. Yeah, but this is like, next level. He tilted his head slightly. You want to go back? I didn't even need to think about it. No. That answer came too fast to be anything but honest. His lips twitched. Didn't think so. I nudged him lightly. Too late. I rolled my eyes, but there was no real annoyance behind it. Just familiarity. Just us. As I closed my eyes, I expected my mind to start racing again. To replay everything. To overanalyze it like I always did. But it didn't. For once, it was quiet. Calm. And just before I drifted off, I felt his hand tighten slightly where it rested against me, not enough to wake me. Just enough to remind me he was still there. And for the first time that night, I didn't question it. I just let it happen. I woke up before him. That alone felt weird. Dylan was always the one up first, early runs, random workouts, annoying energy at hours that shouldn't even exist. Meanwhile, I usually needed at least 2 alarms and a solid 10 minutes of regretting my life choices before I could function. But that morning, I was awake and very aware. The first thing I noticed was the warmth. The second, his arm still around me. Not loose. Not accidental. It was like sometime during the night, we'd both shifted without thinking, ending up closer than we had been before. My back pressed lightly against his chest, his breathing slow and steady behind me. For a second, I didn't move. I just stayed there, staring at the wall, letting everything from last night settle properly in my head. The game. The bet. The way it stopped being about either of those things way too quickly. Shit, I muttered under my breath. Because now that it was morning, everything felt a little more real. A little less easy to ignore. I shifted slightly, testing the space. His arm tightened. Don't. Dylan mumbled, voice rough with sleep. I froze. You're awake? I asked quietly. Barely, he said, pulling me a little closer like it was the most natural thing in the world. That did something to my chest I wasn't prepared for. You always this clingy? I muttered. Only when I win bets, he replied. I huffed a small laugh despite myself. You're unbelievable. Yeah, he said, sounding way too satisfied for someone who just woke up. There was a pause. Neither of us moved. And then, you trying to escape? He asked. I hesitated. No. Good. His hand shifted slightly, not gripping, just settling more comfortably, like he had zero intention of letting me go anytime soon. And the worst part? I didn't actually mind. Eventually, I turned slightly, enough to face him. Up close like this, I could see the difference in him. Not just physically, but in the way he looked at me now. Less guarded. More certain. You're staring, I said. You noticed, he replied. Hard not to. A faint smirk. Good. I rolled my eyes. You're so annoying. Still here, though. I nudged him lightly. Don't push it. But there was no real weight behind it. Because again, he wasn't wrong. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It just lingered, like we were both figuring out what came next without actually saying it out loud. So, I said eventually, exhaling. What now? Dylan didn't answer right away. Typical. Instead, he studied me for a second, like he was deciding how honest he wanted to be. Now, he said slowly, we stopped pretending that didn't happen. I raised an eyebrow. That's your plan. Pretty solid plan. Yeah. I shifted slightly. And what does that actually mean? Another pause. Then, it means I'm not going back to how things were, he said. That hit harder than I expected. Dylan, I mean it, he added, more serious now. I'm not acting like this was just some one-time thing. My stomach tightened. Because that complicated things. A lot. You're assuming I want that, I pointed out. His gaze didn't waver. You don't. I opened my mouth. Then stopped. Because the answer wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. I don't know, I admitted. And yeah, that felt more honest than anything else I could have said. He nodded slightly. Didn't get defensive. Didn't push. Just accepted it. Fair, he said. Another pause. But you didn't say no. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head. You always do that. Do what? Twist things. A faint smile. I don't have to twist anything. You already said enough. I looked away for a second. Because again, he wasn't wrong. We eventually got out of bed. That part felt strangely normal. Like if you ignored everything that happened, it could have been any other morning. Except it wasn't. Every small thing felt different now. The way we moved around each other in the kitchen. The way our shoulders brushed when there was plenty of space. The way neither of us made a joke about it. Coffee, he asked. Yeah, I said, leaning against the counter. He handed me a mug, fingers brushing mine for just a second longer than necessary. And yeah, I noticed. Of course I did. You're doing that on purpose, I said. Doing what? He asked, way too casually. I gave him a look. He smirked. Maybe. I shook my head, taking a sip. You're not subtle at all. Never said I was. We ended up sitting across from each other, the quiet stretching again, but this time, it felt like something new was building underneath it. Not tension. Not exactly. Just awareness. So what? I said finally. This is just how it's going to be now. Dylan leaned back slightly, studying me again. Depends, he said. On what? On you. I frowned. That's not an answer. It is, he replied. You decide if this was a one-time thing or not. That put the weight back on me. I didn't love that, but I also didn't hate it. Because the truth was, I didn't want to pretend last night didn't happen. I just didn't know what it meant yet. You're making this complicated, I said. No, he shook his head. I'm just not letting you ignore it. I held his gaze for a second, then looked down at my coffee. Give me a little time, I said. For once. He didn't argue. All right, he said. And somehow, that felt bigger than anything else he'd done so far. But as I sat there, stealing glances at him when he wasn't looking, I already knew the problem. Tom wasn't going to make this easier. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't actually want things to go back to how they were. And that was going to change everything. Tom didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. Because once I left Dylan's place, once I was back in my own apartment, alone, with nothing but my thoughts and way too much silence, everything hit at once. I tried to distract myself, threw on a show, scrolled my phone, even went for a run, like somehow exhausting my body would shut my brain up. It didn't. Every time I slowed down for even a second, my mind went straight back to him. The way he looked at me, the way he waited for me to decide, the fact that he didn't push when I asked for time. That part stuck the most. Because Dylan wasn't the type to wait. But for me, he did. Great, I muttered, dropping onto my couch. That's not helping. If anything, it made it harder to ignore how much I actually cared. By the time my phone buzzed, I'd been staring at the ceiling for who knows how long. Dylan, you alive? I stared at the message. Simple. Casual. Like last night didn't completely change everything. I typed back. Me, barely. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Dylan, dramatic. I huffed out a quiet laugh. Me, shut up. Pause. Then, Dylan, you still overthinking? I stared at that for a second longer. Of course he'd go straight for that. Me, maybe. A few seconds. Dylan, come over. My stomach tightened. Just 2 words. No pressure. No explanation. Just come over. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. This was exactly what I said I needed time for. And yet, I was already grabbing my keys. Idiot, I muttered to myself. The drive felt shorter this time. Or maybe I just didn't notice it. Because my head was too busy replaying everything again, but now with one very clear difference. I wasn't trying to push it away anymore. I pulled up outside his place, sitting there for a second before getting out. This was a bad idea. Probably. Definitely. I still walked in. Dylan opened the door before I even knocked. Like he knew. Hey, he said. Hey. And just like that, that same tension snapped right back into place. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar now. Thought you needed time, he said, leaning against the doorframe. I did, I replied. And I shrugged slightly. Time's overrated. That earned a quiet laugh from him. Yeah, he said. Figured you'd say that. Of course he did. I stepped inside, kicking my shoes off like I'd done 100 times before. But again, nothing felt the same. We ended up in the living room, neither of us sitting right away, just standing there for a second too long. So, Dylan said, crossing his arms slightly, you gonna tell me what you decided? I looked at him, really looked at him. And yeah, there was no point pretending anymore. I decided I hate you, I said. He blinked. That's not what I was expecting. I stepped closer. Because you were right. That wiped the smirk off his face. About what? I held his gaze. About me not wanting to go back. Silence. Then, say it again, he said, quieter now. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to go back to how things were. There it was. Out in the open. No taking it back now. Dylan didn't say anything right away. He just stepped closer. And yeah, this time, there was no hesitation from either of us. You sure? He asked. I nodded once. Yeah. That was all he needed. The distance between us disappeared again. But it felt different now. Not uncertain. Not testing. Just intentional. His hand found mine first. Simple. Grounding. Like he was making sure this was real. And then, good, he said softly. I barely had time to react before he pulled me in again. Closer. Familiar now, but still enough to make my pulse spike. And this time, there was no question behind it. No pause. No, are you going to stop me? Because he already knew the answer. And so did I. Later, when we finally pulled apart, I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. This is such a bad idea, I muttered. Dylan huffed a laugh. Yeah. Yeah. I looked at him, then added, I don't care. His expression softened again, that same way from the night before. And yeah, that might have been the most dangerous part of all. We ended up back on his couch this time, not even pretending we were going to act normal. So what now? I asked. He glanced at me. Now we stop pretending this is complicated. I raised an eyebrow. It is complicated. Only if you make it that way. I rolled my eyes. You're unbelievable. And you're still here. I nudged him again. You're never letting that go, are you? Nope. I shook my head, but I couldn't stop the small smile. The truth was, he was right. Again. Because for all the overthinking, all the hesitation, it really came down to one thing. I chose to be here. With him. And for once, that felt like enough. But as I leaned back, his shoulder brushing mine, something else settled in the back of my mind. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It wasn't just tension, or curiosity, or a stupid bet. This was turning into something real. And if I knew Dylan, that meant things were about to get a lot more intense. Whether I was ready for that or not, things didn't go back to normal. Not even close. And the weird part? We didn't even try. It started with small things. Too small to call out, but impossible to ignore once you noticed them. Like how Dylan stopped knocking when he came over, just walked straight into my apartment like he belonged there. Or how I stopped questioning it. Like how we'd sit on opposite ends of the couch, and somehow always end up shoulder to shoulder without either of us acknowledging the shift. Like how conversations felt the same. But underneath them, there was something new. Something heavier. Real. Move. Dylan said one evening, nudging my leg with his. I'm literally not in your way. I replied without looking up from my phone. You are. How? You just are. I sighed, shifting slightly anyway. You're insufferable. Yeah, he said, dropping down next to me. But you like me. I snorted. Debatable. Not really. I rolled my eyes, but didn't move away when his arm rested along the back of the couch behind me. Didn't comment on how close he was. Didn't comment on how natural it felt now. That was the problem. It felt normal. Like we'd been like this longer than we actually had. But it wasn't just the easy moments. It was the quiet ones too. The ones that hit harder. You've been quiet, Dylan said one night. We were on his balcony, city lights stretching out in front of us, both of us leaning against the railing. I'm thinking, I replied. Dangerous. Shut up. He smirked, but didn't push. For once. That made me glance at him. You're not going to ask? I said. I already know what you're thinking about. I raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. Yeah. Enlighten me. He turned his head slightly, meeting my eyes. You're trying to figure out what this is. My stomach tightened. And, and you're overcomplicating it. I huffed a quiet laugh. Of course that's your answer. It's the right one. Or, I countered, you're just avoiding the conversation. That made him pause. Not long, but long enough. I'm not avoiding anything, he said. Then say it. Say what? What this is, I replied, gesturing vaguely between us. The air shifted again. That same tension, but different now. More grounded. More real. Dylan looked at me for a second, like he was deciding how honest he wanted to be. Then, it's whatever we want it to be. I frowned. That's not an answer. It is, he said. You're just looking for something more defined. Yeah, I admitted. I am. Why? I hesitated. Because the answer felt bigger than I wanted it to be. Because it matters, I said finally. That landed. I could see it in the way his expression changed. Subtle, but real. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Dylan straightened slightly, turning more fully toward me. Okay, he said. Okay, what? You want an answer? I nodded. He held my gaze. This matters to me too. Simple. No jokes. No deflection. Just that. And somehow, that hit harder than anything else he could have said. I exhaled slowly, looking away for a second before glancing back at him. Yeah. I said. Yeah. Since when? A faint smirk. Probably longer than you. I scoffed. You're so full of. I'm serious, he cut in. That stopped me. Because Dylan didn't cut people off like that unless he meant it. I didn't just wake up one day and decide this, he continued. I just didn't think you'd ever meet me halfway. There it was again. That honesty. And yeah, it got to me. I leaned back against the railing, processing that. Because suddenly, this wasn't just something that happened. It was something that had been building. On both sides. We just never said it out loud. Until now. So what? I said after a moment. We just keep going like this? Dylan shrugged slightly. Unless you don't want to. I looked at him. Really looked. And yeah, that answer came easier now. I do, I said. No hesitation. No overthinking. Just the truth. His expression softened again. That same way I was starting to recognize. And before I could say anything else, he stepped closer. Not rushing. Not asking. Just closing that space like it didn't belong there anymore. You're sure? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yeah. That was all it took. And as everything settled into place, I realized something. This didn't feel like losing a bet anymore. It didn't even feel like taking a risk. It felt like something I should have seen coming a long time ago. And maybe the craziest part? If I could go back to that night on the court, knowing exactly how it would end, I'd still lose on purpose. A week later, I realized something. Nothing about this felt temporary anymore. It wasn't just the way Dylan looked at me now, or the way we didn't hesitate anymore, no second guessing, no awkward pauses, no what are we doing, hanging in the air. It was everything around that. The routine we didn't plan, but somehow built anyway. Did you eat? He asked, walking into my apartment like usual. No, of course not. I glanced up from the couch. I was busy. Doing what? He said, already heading toward my kitchen. Thinking. He stopped, looked back at me. That explains it. Useless activity. I snorted. Shut up. But I didn't stop him when he started pulling things out of my fridge like it was his. Didn't question it. Didn't even think about it. Because at this point, it just made sense. That was the weirdest part. How natural it all felt. Like we'd skipped past the awkward stage entirely. Like there was never a version of this where we weren't this. You're staring again, Dylan said, not even turning around. I'm not. You are. I leaned back into the couch. You're just assuming. He glanced over his shoulder, smirking. I know you. Yeah, that was the problem. He did. And I knew him too. Better than anyone. Which is probably why this worked. Later, we ended up back in the same spot we always did on the couch. Too close. Neither of us pretending it wasn't intentional. You realize this is your fault, I said. My fault, he repeated. Yeah. If you hadn't suggested that stupid bet, you agreed to it. Barely. You still agreed. I rolled my eyes. You manipulated the situation. He huffed a quiet laugh. You're really trying to rewrite history right now. Maybe. He nudged me slightly. You lost. Yeah, I said, glancing at him. Then added. And I'd lose again. That got his attention. I could see it immediately. The shift. Yeah, he said, quieter now. I nodded. Yeah. Because that was the truth. No hesitation this time. No overthinking. Just clarity. Dylan studied me for a second, like he was making sure I meant it. Then, this wasn't just about the bet for me. I know, and you're okay with that? I held his gaze. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. That was it. That was the moment everything fully settled. No more what if. No more maybe. Just this. He leaned back slightly, exhaling like he'd been holding something in longer than I realized. Good, he said. Simple. But it carried weight. We didn't need to define it right away. Didn't need labels or long conversations or anything complicated. Because for once, we were on the same page without forcing it. Still think it was a bad idea? Dylan asked after a while. I thought about it. The bet. That night. Everything that came after. Then I shook my head. No. He smirked. Took you long enough. Don't get used to being right. Too late. I nudged him again, but didn't move away. Didn't need to. And as the silence settled in comfortable, steady, real, I realized something else. This didn't feel like something new. It felt like something that had been there all along. We just finally stopped ignoring it. Hey, Dylan said suddenly. Yeah. He glanced at me, that familiar look back in his eyes but softer now. What if I win next time? I raised an eyebrow. There's not going to be a next time. Oh, there is. Yeah. I smirked slightly. And what's the bet? He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me. Then, we'll figure it out. I shook my head, laughing quietly. You're unbelievable. Yeah, he said, then added. But you still said yes. And yeah, that part wasn't changing anytime soon.